In the beginning of this series about Joseph's life, we're going to dive into one of the most inspiring stories in the Bible, a story of faith, strength, and destiny. Joseph, son of Jacob, wasn't just any ordinary young man. He was set apart by God to fulfill a great purpose. But before we see the big events and victories, we first need to understand the pain, betrayals, and challenges that shaped his journey. And that's exactly what we'll see in this first chapter. But before we get into the story, I want to ask you for something special. If you like learning from God's Word and want to follow this whole series about Joseph, please click like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. That way, you won't miss any of the upcoming episodes of this journey that will build up your life and strengthen your faith. Now, let's dive together into the beginning of the story of Joseph, the young dreamer chosen by God to change the destiny of his family and an entire nation. Joseph was one of Jacob's sons, the leader of Israel. He was born to Rachel, the woman Jacob loved most, and from the start, this gave his life a special glow. The Bible tells us that Jacob loved Joseph more than all his other sons, and that love was shown even in clear ways. Jacob made him a special coat, a colorful garment that showed he was special, honored, and in a way, favored. This simple but important act sparked a dangerous feeling in Joseph's brothers: jealousy. They saw in Joseph not only their father's beloved son, but also someone who seemed meant for a place of honor, and that only fueled the anger growing inside them. Joseph, however, wasn't just a young man loved by his father. He had dreams, and these dreams were not ordinary. They were messages from God, signs that his life had a bigger purpose. In one dream, he saw bundles of wheat in the field, and his bundle stood up tall, while his brother's bundles bowed down to his. In another dream, even more amazing, he saw the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowing down to him. These dreams were like prophecies, pointing to a future where Joseph would be lifted up by God and have power, not just over his family, but over an entire nation. But for his brothers, hearing those dreams was like adding fuel to the fire of their jealousy. They already hated him for being their father's favorite, and now they saw in Joseph someone who seemed to put himself above them. And here's a big lesson for us. Often when God puts a dream in our hearts, not everyone will understand it. Some might even make fun of or look down on what God has shown us. But God's dreams don't depend on what people think. They are sealed by the Lord himself, and what he promises, he keeps. Joseph didn't yet know how much his dreams would lead him down hard paths, but one thing was sure: God was with him. As the days went by, Joseph's brothers' jealousy only grew. They couldn't even speak to him. Jacob, on the other hand, sent Joseph to check on his brothers while they were tending the flocks. It was as if Joseph was their father's eyes in the field, and that only made their anger worse. One day, Jacob told Joseph to go to Shechem, where his brothers were taking care of the sheep. Joseph, always obedient, went right away. On the way, he met a man who told him his brothers had gone to Dothan. Joseph kept going, not knowing that this trip would change his life forever. When his brothers saw him from far away, they recognized him by his colorful coat. A cruel idea was born in their hearts. "Here comes the dreamer," they said to each other. "Let's kill him and throw him into a pit. We'll say a wild animal ate him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." But Reuben, the oldest brother, tried to stop them from shedding innocent blood. He suggested they throw him into a well instead, without killing him. Secretly, Reuben planned to rescue Joseph later and take him back to Jacob. When Joseph arrived, his brothers grabbed him roughly, tore off his colorful coat, and threw him into an empty well. Here we see how jealousy can blind a person's heart. Those who should have protected Joseph became his enemies. And this is how, many times, people close to us can rise up against the dreams God has put in us. But remember, even when people try to bring us down, God's plans can never be stopped. After throwing Joseph into the well, his brothers sat down to eat. While they were doing this, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming, carrying spices, balm, and myrrh on their way to Egypt. Then Judah had an idea. What will we gain if we kill our brother and hide his blood? Let's sell him to these traders. That way we won't shed blood, and we'll still make money from it. The brothers agreed. They pulled Joseph out of the well and sold him for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. So, the young dreamer, loved by his father, went from a free son to a slave in a foreign land. Meanwhile, his brothers took his colorful coat, dipped it in animal blood, and brought it to Jacob, who cried bitterly, convinced that his beloved son had been eaten by a wild beast. This moment is powerful because Joseph was torn from his home, his family, and everything he knew. But even in the middle of pain and unfairness, God's hand was on him. What seemed like the end was, in reality, just the start of a great purpose. Now imagine Joseph, walking as a slave through the desert to Egypt, not understanding what was happening. He had dreamed big dreams, but at that moment it seemed like everything was lost. However, even there, God's presence was with him. The Lord had never promised Joseph that the path would be easy, but a bigger plan was being woven. When he arrived in Egypt, Joseph was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. The Bible shows us that even in Potiphar's house, Joseph did well in everything he did, because the Lord was with him. Potiphar soon realized there was something special about that young man and put him in charge of his whole house. Everything Joseph managed did well because God poured his blessing on the work of his hands. This is one of the biggest signs of God's faithfulness. Even when you're in a strange land, even when the world tries to steal your peace, when God's presence is with you, nothing can stop the flow of his grace. Joseph's story teaches us that God's dreams can take us to unexpected places. Many times, before we see a promise come true, we need to go through a test of faith. Joseph, the young dreamer, started his journey hated, betrayed, and sold as a slave. To human eyes, his story could have ended there. But what people planned for evil, God was turning into good. Maybe you're going through times where everything seems against what God promised you. Maybe your situation tells you there's no way out. But remember, the same God who was with Joseph is also with you. He never leaves his children and always keeps what he promised. And so we close the first episode of this series about Joseph. We saw how God began to show his plan through the dreams of a young man, and how his brother's jealousy put him on a path of pain and testing. But this is just the beginning of an amazing story that we'll explore more deeply in the next episodes. If this message touched your heart, I want to ask you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the rest of this series. In the next chapters, we'll see how Joseph faced temptations, unfairness, and still stayed true to God until he was honored before everyone. May this story inspire you to never give up on the dreams the Lord has put in your life. Because just like Joseph, you too were called to live something greater.